The fluorescent lights of St. Mary's Hospital flickered as Aaliyah Johnson stumbled through the automatic doors, her hands clutching her swollen belly. At 23 years old, she was experiencing the most terrifying moment of her life. Contractions rippled through her body every few minutes, each one more intense than the last. "Please, I need help," she gasped to the nurse at the reception desk. "My baby is coming." The nurse, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, glanced up from her computer screen. She took in Aaliyah's appearance, the worn clothes, the lack of a wedding ring, the fear in her dark eyes. "Do you have insurance?" she asked mechanically. "No, but please, I can pay something. I just need—" Another contraction cut her off, forcing her to double over in pain. Dr. Richard Brennan happened to be walking past the reception area when he heard the commotion. At 52, he was one of the hospital's most experienced obstetricians, but also one of its most prejudiced. He had built a successful private practice, delivering babies for the city's elite, and he made no secret of his preference for wealthy, married patients. He took one look at Aaliyah and frowned. "Transfer her to County General," he said coldly to the nurse. "They handle these cases, but doctor, she's in active labor," the nurse protested. "County is 40 minutes away." "Not my problem," Dr. Brennan replied, turning to walk away. "I'm scheduled for a delivery in the private wing. My patient actually has insurance." Aaliyah's eyes filled with tears as she watched the doctor disappear down the hallway. She had heard stories about women being turned away from hospitals, but she never imagined it would happen to her. As another contraction seized her body, she wondered if her baby would survive the journey to County General. Before the ambulance could be called, the emergency room doors burst open with such force that the glass rattled in its frame. 6 men in dark suits entered, moving with military precision. They parted to reveal a tall, imposing figure in the center, Minjun Park, one of the most feared names in the city's underworld. At 35, Minjun commanded respect through both his business acumen and his ruthless enforcement of loyalty. His tailored suit probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and the scar along his left cheekbone only added to his intimidating presence. But what drew everyone's attention was the expression on his face, pure undisguised panic. "Aaliyah," he shouted, his Korean accent thick with emotion. He rushed to her side, catching her as another contraction nearly brought her to her knees. "I'm here, love. I'm here." The entire emergency room had fallen silent. Nurses and patients alike stared at the scene unfolding before them. Minjun Park, the notorious Korean Mafia boss whose name was whispered in fear throughout the city, was cradling a young black woman with a tenderness that seemed impossible given his reputation. "Where is the doctor?" Minjun demanded, his voice now carrying the steel that had made grown men tremble. "My wife needs medical attention immediately." The receptionist's hands shook as she picked up the phone. "Dr. Brennan, there's a situation in the emergency room. You need to come back." "I told you, transfer her to Dr. Brennan's," voice came through the speaker, but he stopped mid-sentence when he returned to the waiting area and saw who was standing there. Everyone in the city knew Minjun Park's face. His organization controlled everything from import-export businesses to several legitimate real estate ventures. More importantly, his family had deep connections to both the Korean and international criminal networks. He was not a man anyone wanted to cross. Dr. Brennan's face went pale. "Mr. Park," he stammered. You didn't realize what?" Minjun interrupted, his eyes blazing with fury. "That my wife deserved medical care, that her life and my child's life are valuable." He took a step toward the doctor, and 2 of his men moved to flank him. "Or did you not realize that refusing her care would have consequences?" Dr. Brennan found himself escorted to the delivery room by Minjun's security detail, his professional pride warring with his very real fear. As he scrubbed in, his hands trembled slightly. He had spent his entire career believing he could choose his patients based on their ability to pay, their social status, their appearance. Now he was facing the consequences of that prejudice. Inside the delivery room, Aaliyah was already on the bed, her breathing labored. A nurse had started an IV, and the fetal monitor showed that the baby was in distress. Minjun stood by her side, holding her hand, whispering to her in a mixture of Korean and English. "You're going to be fine, Sarang. Our daughter is strong, just like her mother." he murmured, pressing his lips to her forehead. I should have been here sooner. I should never have left you alone. You're here now, Aaliyah managed between contractions. That's what matters, Doctor. Brennan entered and immediately assessed the situation. Whatever his personal feelings, he was still a skilled physician. The baby's heart rate is dropping, he announced. We need to deliver now. For the next 45 minutes, the delivery room was a flurry of controlled chaos. Dr. Brennan barked orders to the nurses, monitored Aaliyah's vital signs, and prepared for potential complications. Minjun never left Aaliyah's side, his usually cold demeanor completely shattered by the vulnerability of the woman he loved. One more push, Aaliyah, Dr. Brennan instructed. You're almost there. With a final exhausting effort, Aaliyah pushed, and the sound of a baby's cry filled the room. Dr. Brennan held up a tiny squirming infant with a mixture of Asian and African features, her skin a beautiful bronze, her eyes squeezed shut as she announced her arrival to the world. A daughter, he said quietly, placing the baby on Aaliyah's chest. She's perfect. Minjun stared at his daughter with wonder, tears streaming down his scarred face. In that moment, the feared Mafia boss was just a father, overwhelmed by the miracle of life. She's beautiful, he whispered, like her mother. After ensuring that both Aaliyah and the baby were stable, Dr. Brennan stepped out of the delivery room, exhausted and shaken. He had just saved 2 lives, but he couldn't shake the knowledge that he had almost been responsible for their deaths. He was met in the hallway by Minjun, whose expression had returned to its usual hard mask. We need to talk, Minjun said, gesturing to a private consultation room. It wasn't a request. Inside the room, Minjun closed the door and turned to face the doctor. For a long moment he said nothing, just studied the man who had almost condemned his wife and child to die in an ambulance. Do you know how I met Aaliyah? Minjun finally asked, his voice quiet but dangerous. She was working 3 jobs to pay for her mother's cancer treatment. She served me coffee at a diner at 6 in the morning, went to her nursing classes until 3, then worked as a cashier until midnight. Every single day. Dr. Brennan remained silent, sensing that interrupting would be a mistake. I fell in love with her determination, her kindness, her refusal to be defeated by circumstances, Minjun continued. She didn't care who I was or what I did. She saw me as a person, not as a monster or a paycheck. She chose to love me despite everything. He stepped closer to the doctor, and Dr. Brennan instinctively backed up until he hit the wall. You looked at her and saw nothing. Worse than nothing. You saw someone not worth saving. Someone whose life had no value. Minjun's hand shot out and grabbed Dr. Brennan by the collar. If anything had happened to her or my daughter, because of your prejudice, no amount of money or power could have saved you from me. Do you understand, Doctor? Brennan nodded frantically, his earlier arrogance completely evaporated. Minjun released him and stepped back. But they're both alive and healthy, thanks to your skill once you decided to do your job. So I'm going to give you a choice. You can continue being the man who judges people by their appearance and their bank account, or you can become the doctor who remembers this night and changes. He pulled out a business card and placed it on the consultation table. This is the contact information for a foundation I'm starting in Aaliyah's name. It will provide medical care for women like her. Women who work hard but can't afford insurance. Women who are turned away from hospitals because they don't look like they can pay. Doctor, Brennan stared at the card in disbelief. You're going to volunteer there, Minjun continued. 1 day a week, minimum. You're going to treat every patient with the same care you would give to your wealthy private patients, and you're going to train other doctors to do the same. Consider it your penance. And if I refuse? Dr. Brennan asked, though he already knew the answer. Minjun's smile was cold. Then I'll make sure every hospital in this city knows exactly what you did tonight. Your career will be over, and you'll spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, wondering when my patients will run out. 3 days later, Dr. Brennan found himself back at St. Mary's Hospital, this time checking on Aaliyah and the baby during their recovery. He had spent the past 72 hours in deep reflection, unable to escape the shame of his actions. His wife had been horrified when he told her what happened, and even his daughter, a social worker, had looked at him with disappointment. When he entered Aaliyah's private room, paid for by Minjun, naturally, he found her sitting up in bed, nursing her daughter. The baby, whom they had named Minhee Aaliyah Park, was feeding contentedly, her tiny hand wrapped around her mother's finger. Dr. Brennan, Aaliyah greeted him with a warmth he didn't deserve. Thank you for taking care of us. He couldn't meet her eyes. Mrs. Park, I owe you an apology. What I did, what I almost did, was inexcusable. I let my prejudices cloud my judgment, and I nearly cost you and your daughter your lives. Aaliyah studied him for a moment, then gestured to a chair beside the bed. Sit down, doctor. Reluctantly, he sat. Do you want to know why I fell in love with Minjun? She asked, gently adjusting the baby in her arms. It's not because of his money or his power. I fell in love with him because he saw me, really saw me, not as a stereotype or a statistic, but as a person with dreams and fears and worth. She looked directly at Dr. Brennan now, her gaze steady and unflinching. The world is full of people who judge others based on the color of their skin, their accent, their address. I've dealt with it my whole life, but I never expected it from someone whose job is to save lives. Dr. Brennan felt tears welling in his eyes. I'm so sorry, he whispered. I know you are, Aaliyah replied, and I believe people can change. Minjun told me about the foundation and your commitment to volunteer. That's a good start, but real change has to come from inside. You have to examine why you made those assumptions about me and commit to rooting out that bias. The baby finished nursing, and Aaliyah lifted her to her shoulder to burp her. Hold her, she said, offering the infant to Dr. Brennan. He hesitated, then carefully took little Minhee into his arms. The baby looked up at him with wide, dark eyes, so innocent and trusting. In that moment, holding this perfect blend of two cultures, two worlds, Dr. Brennan felt something shift inside him. She's going to grow up in a world that might judge her for being different, Aaliyah said softly, for being the daughter of a Korean father and a black mother, for having a family that doesn't fit into neat little boxes. I need to know that when she's sick, when she's scared, when she needs medical care, there will be doctors who will see her as a human being first. Dr. Brennan looked down at the baby in his arms and made a silent vow. This child, and every child like her, would never be turned away by him again. The Aaliyah Park Foundation Medical Center opened its doors on a crisp autumn morning. Located in one of the city's underserved neighborhoods, the gleaming new building stood as a testament to both love and redemption. Minjun had funded the entire project, but he insisted that Aaliyah's vision guided every decision. Dr. Richard Brennan stood in the main examination room, now the medical director of the Foundation's obstetrics program. He had kept his private practice, but he spent 3 days a week at the center, treating patients regardless of their ability to pay. More importantly, he had recruited other doctors and trained them in culturally competent care. The transformation hadn't been easy. Dr. Brennan had to confront years of ingrained prejudice and privilege. He attended workshops on implicit bias, listened to patients' stories about discrimination in healthcare, and slowly rebuilt himself into a better physician and a better person. On this opening day, Aaliyah arrived with Minhee, now a chubby, smiling 6-month-old who had inherited her father's strong will and her mother's warm personality. Minjun walked beside them, one arm protectively around his wife, looking every bit the devoted husband, despite the bodyguards who still flanked them at a discreet distance. Dr. Brennan, Aaliyah smiled, embracing him warmly. This is amazing. You've helped create something that will save so many lives. I'm just trying to make amends, he replied humbly, and to honor the lesson you and Minhee taught me. Minjun extended his hand, and Dr. Brennan shook it firmly. You kept your word, the Korean man said. You've proven that people can change. But remember, this is just the beginning. There's still much work to be done. I know, Dr. Brennan agreed, and I'm committed to doing it. As the first patients began arriving at the center, Dr. Brennan watched them with new eyes. Each person had a story, a life, inherent dignity and worth. They deserved care, not because of what they could pay or who they knew, but because they were human beings. That evening, as the sun set over the city, the foundation held a small reception. Aaliyah stood at the podium, Minhee on her hip, and addressed the crowd of doctors, nurses, community leaders, and patients. This center exists because of a near tragedy, she began, but tragedy can be a catalyst for change. Dr. Brennan could have chosen to remain the person he was on the night my daughter was born. Instead, he chose growth, humility, and service. That's what this foundation represents, the possibility of transformation. She looked out at the diverse faces in the crowd. Healthcare is a human right, not a privilege. Every mother, every baby, every person deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. That's the promise we make here. Min Jun stood beside her, his hand on her back, his usually stern face softened with pride. In his world of violence and crime, this center was a small light of redemption, proof that even people like him could create something good. Dr. Brennan watched from the side of the room, holding Minhee while Aaliyah spoke. The baby grabbed his finger and smiled at him, and he felt his heart swell with purpose. He had been given a second chance, and he would spend the rest of his career making sure that no one, regardless of their race, their economic status, or their circumstances, would ever be turned away from medical care again. As the reception concluded and guests began to leave, the unlikely trio, the reformed doctor, the mafia boss, and the young mother, stood together, united by a moment of crisis that had transformed all their lives. They had created something lasting from pain, something beautiful from prejudice, something hopeful from fear. And little Minhee, oblivious to the profound impact her birth had created, simply cooed and reached for her parents, content in the knowledge that she was loved, valued, and safe, exactly as every child should be.